I think sometimes sustainability can get really like doom and gloom, like, there's nothing we can do. Corporations are so terrible, blah, 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 blah. When you put yourself in a different mindset that actually we can do things about it. I've seen it actively, and we are transforming an entire industry. That's exhilarating. Like we're doing the work. And so, anybody in science, I would encourage you to join our community and to think about the positive outcomes that they could have. And if it's not in our community, the green building community has an amazing group. And, the data center community has a great group called the Infrastructure Masons that is working on similar issues. So find your people, try to drive change. And I think we're going to be successful when we make it fun and we show that there are these positive potential outcomes that we can reach and not just sit in the doom and gloom, because I think people can get really stuck in that.
In my conversation with James Connelly, the CEO of My Green Lab, we talk about how voluntary movements outperform regulation, how one employee at AstraZeneca started as a champion and got promoted with a global role being created around her, and why James believes that life sciences is going to be the first industry to decouple its growth from carbon. Here's my conversation with James Connelly. All right, James, thank you so much for joining. Before we dive in, can you give people the 10-second version of who you are and what My Green Labs does?
Sure. Well, I'm very excited to be here, and thanks for the invitation, Lisa. So my name's James Conley, and I'm the CEO of My Green Lab and Impact Laboratories. And My Green Lab is a nonprofit with a mission to build a global culture of sustainability in science. And we partner with Impact Laboratories, which is our third-party verification arm, to actually develop the technology tools and scale up and provide third-party verification for our certification.
You've certified labs around the world. And so can you take me into a moment where a lab gets their first sustainability assessment results and what is their reaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everybody in life science is aware of the environmental impact, at least of waste, and plastic waste and single-use plastic waste is one of the key issues that we focus on as an organization. But I think often they're not aware of all of the impact of the activities that they're doing across their laboratory operations, from the energy use of their equipment, to the energy use and fan energy usage of their fume hoods, to the toxic chemicals that they're interacting with. And so I think one thing that's really interesting about how our program works is the very first step is they take a comprehensive assessment. And that assessment includes two parts. One is a survey of everybody in the lab, asking them what best practices are they implementing. And then another is a list of policies and procedures that any lab could do, that represent the state of best practice in terms of sustainability. So I think most labs kind of think they're doing some things, or maybe they have a few initiatives, and are actually pretty surprised by their initial baseline results.
Okay.
We have a scoring system that goes all the way from bronze to green being our highest score. Most labs are actually more in the bronze range when they complete the baseline assessment.
Hmm.
And that's for two reasons. One, either they're not dealing with a number of the best practices sort of at an organizational level, and it's a bunch of things they haven't thought of before. Or perhaps the lab manager thinks they're doing a lot, but when you do the survey of everybody in the lab, you actually get very different responses than what the lab manager thinks is going on. So both
Interesting.
maybe there's a gap between what they thought they were doing and what the potential is, or they're sort of misunderstanding that a lot of people in the lab maybe don't know or aren't implementing those best practices that they thought they were.
So is there a number or a finding that you see consistently shocks teams, like something they had no idea about?
Yeah, I think honestly, the energy consumption of equipment is very
Okay.
surprising to people. I think there's like a general knowledge. Okay, yeah, I'm using a freezer; it uses energy, but a lot of labs, particularly wet labs, which is what we work with primarily, that deal with biological samples, use ultra low temperature freezers. Ultra
Mm.
low temperature freezers can use as much energy as 2 American homes. So that's a lot. And, a lot of these labs might have a dozen.
Wow, crazy. And you described scientists as being like data hungry creatures. How does that play into why certification works for them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We often kind of face this challenge. People saying, oh, it's going to be really difficult to get our scientists to do anything. They can be difficult to work with. They need data, they need validation.
Mm.
One of the ways that our standard works is through the initial survey and the assessment process. It basically helps them understand what their environmental impact is now. So it
Okay.
builds awareness so that they can understand kind of where their baseline is. And what we find is when people figure out, hey, wow, all those freezers, those are using as much energy as 2 homes. A lot of them are implementing energy efficiency measures in their own lives, and so it's sort of much easier for them to kind of quantify and understand the potential in their daily work. And that's really kind of one of the magic of our tools is by putting the data in their hands, then they can understand how they can make a difference.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're almost giving them a cheat sheet of like where's the low hanging fruit, where are the opportunities where they should go and focus, both by like assessing their current practices, but also giving them kind of like this overall information about what you typically see in labs and where the impact can be. Is that right?
100%, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the sort of last component of it is within our tool, we actually have a impact estimator that allows
Hmm.
them to estimate what the actual both resource savings and financial savings will be from taking various actions. So they can interrogate that data, they can actually change the values. We use a carbon factor for each location when they input the address of the lab, but that's something that they can change and modify. And so people get really into the tool. And by giving them the ability to understand and manipulate the data, I think it really plays in well to the psychology of scientists because then it's something that they can really validate and see the outcomes from and run their own experiments to see whether our data matches up with their experience.
Yeah. So is it usually like one champion that's coming into the that's coming from the organization saying, "Hey, we should do this." They go out and give the survey to, is it everybody in the lab? And then what happens? Like, does everybody from there take action, or is there like a like how what are the next steps?
Yeah, so to get started, it really often is just an interested scientist. Often it'll be maybe a younger scientist, somebody that cares about climate change. Not always, but that often happens. And they'll bring it to their lab management. The lab does need to go through the program as a group, so you can't just have one person in the lab because a lot of the changes that we're recommending require the entire lab to engage in that behavior change. Like, for example, one of the things we recommend is keeping fume hoods closed when not in use. You have to
Mm.
do that consistently to actually get the benefit. So everybody has to be bought in. So that champion will get some traction, and then we assign each lab a lab lead. And so that's sort of like the internal champion that's running the program. They do survey everybody in the lab. So actually, at least 50% of people in the lab have to complete the survey, and the target is for 100%. That's how you get the most points. You have a period of time to implement the actions. So it's a around 3 to 6 month improvement period where people take actions, they measure the results of those actions, and then it's at the final stage they actually take that survey again. They submit their data that they receive their certification score for the whole lab. So the more you get everybody engaged, the better score that you can get at the outcome.
That makes sense. So really trying to like shift behavior within the team, and then measuring your baseline initially, and then your progress 3 to 6 months out.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And kind of the another one of the beauties of the program is behavior change isn't very expensive. Just getting
Mm.
people to turn off the lights or close the fume hood sashes, or we recommend keeping ultra low temperature freezers at -70 instead of -80 because it
Hmm.
reduces energy consumption by 20 to 30%. None of this
Wow.
stuff actually costs any capital costs. It's just about building a culture and getting people engaged to make the right decisions. I would say those are the low hanging fruit. However, there's more you can do, like replacing equipment or installing continuous monitoring systems that do require more capital investment. But
Hmm.
those simple behavior change things kind of build the confidence to then go further and make deeper investments.
So for those things that require more capital, do you see kind of drop off there, or what are the challenges and hurdles for people to push for those changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I do think that the nice thing about the program is because you can get some quick wins from the low hanging fruit and get measurable return on investment and financial savings as well as measurable impact, that does give people the ability to build a business case and go to whoever the budget holders are higher up within the organization and unlock additional resource. There's a lot of things that every lab's doing all the time. There's new types of equipment that they might want to acquire. Research is shifting and changing, budgets are changing. So, obviously getting allocation for capital spend is always challenging, and there's just a lot
Right.
of competing priorities. So, yeah, I would say the behavior change stuff, usually they can do that pretty quickly. The
Hmm.
things that are like capital investments or broader policy changes for the business overall are things that are going to take more time and maybe require multiple years of engagement.
Okay, and that would show up in their kind of like bronze, silver, gold, green rating in there, like where they fall in the certification.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Cool.
what we say typically to get gold or platinum within the program, a lot of that you can do just by the behavior change of the lab itself and what you're implementing.
I see.
To get to the green level, you have to start to implement things like sustainable procurement of lab supplies, policy changes like changing the temperature set point of your freezers. In an academic lab, you might just be able to do that on your own. In a corporate lab, you have to get facilities and the whole organization involved in that type of decision. So to get to the green level requires those broader policy changes, which
Okay.
usually can't happen after the first year. That usually it'll take them till the recertification process for them to get all the way to the green level.
I see. Okay. And so we've kind of been talking, I guess we've been talking about any kind of lab, but in my head, we've been having like smaller groups and teams. Some champion who's like, I want to bring this to my company. But you mentioned that the largest pharmaceutical companies are now requiring that their suppliers and vendors get certified as well. How did that cascading start? And who was the first to say, like, we're making this a requirement?
Yeah, so, the first company to really build out a big certification program that ended up becoming policy across all of their global laboratory facilities was AstraZeneca. And actually, Pernilla Sorm, who built the program at AstraZeneca, now works for My Green Lab and is
Oh,
in
cool.
charge of the revision and update process for My Green Lab certification for all of our labs globally.
Oh, that's great.
They were able to take it from sort of a grassroots, nice to have initiative and with data prove out the savings and make it an org wide policy. They're also one of the first organizations that then said, hey, we've had such a good experience with this program. We've been able to drive these outcomes. We want to get our suppliers to come along with us in the same journey. And it's really interesting. There's actually a lot more labs in the value chain of the research ecosystem than there are at the big brands that you might hear of, like AstraZeneca or GSK. And so we now have 10 of the largest pharma companies that have not only implemented it at scale within their own facilities, that are now asking their suppliers to come along that journey with them.
And what is the supplier viewpoint on this? Is it kind of just like, okay, well, we can't lose, AstraZeneca, so we're going to go ahead and do it? So is it just kind of like they do it because they have to, or are they doing it because they want to, or what's been your read on that?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of a mix.
Hmm.
Suppliers are being asked to do a lot right now around sustainability. One of the first things is most companies ask their suppliers to set net zero goals, and then also pursue a program called EcoVadis, which is a way of evaluating the organization as a whole in terms of sustainability.
Okay.
So I think, they got those things out of the way. And now in life science, the largest companies are adding this additional requirement, My Green Lab certification. We would make the argument that it's much more valuable for these companies because it's very specific to the type of work that they're doing, where net zero targets and EcoVadis are not specifically designed for life science companies, although they can be used in life science companies. Ultimately, for a certification standard, though, there has to be like an intrinsic value to do it in the first place. It can't just be because your customers want you to.
Hmm.
So I think as soon as they try it out and they get their foot in the door and they start seeing results, real results, and they start sharing those results with their customers, it will really start to scale. But just like any market, there's kind of the early adopters that are doing it for the right reasons. And then
Hmm.
there's the people that are going to only do it when it's required. We're happy to work with both. And we do think, regardless of your motivations, once the scientists start getting engaged, start seeing the data, start seeing the results, the program usually scales.
Okay, that makes sense. Is that kind of the story you said with AstraZeneca? Like, do you have any more details about how that? I feel like that's a really nice example of a huge company, and if it's like some one person or small group, like how does that even get started in a way that can help drive change at such a big impact?
Yeah, so I think, it was really interesting. Like Pernilla found out about the program, she helped drive it. And they actually ended up creating a whole global green lab position around her so that she could take the
Oh
learnings
wow.
from all of their labs and encourage peer-to-peer learning and sharing. After Pernilla joined our team, she was very capably, the program was taken over by Andrew King, who drove it, I would say, even to a further level. He actually built out a whole tool where they could measure the environmental savings using a low code solution called Smartsheet.
Hmm.
And that Smartsheet tool actually informed the evolution of our impact estimator. And so, one of the
Oh,
really cool
neat.
things about what we do as an organization is our partners will innovate within their organizations or their labs. They'll come up with great ideas. They'll share those ideas with us that will actually go into the certification standard that we then make available to all 5,000 labs and all over 500 organizations that were using it. So it's really cool to see. Andrew's actually like gone on now and recently got a promotion into an executive leadership training program within his organization. And so that's one of the coolest things that we see is,
Yeah.
somebody starting with a passion in a lab, growing it, getting some visibility, and then continuing to grow their career and graduate above and beyond. And it's actually quite a few organizations now that have a global My Green Lab role, something that
Oh wow.
definitely didn't exist 5 years ago, that we're starting to see more and more.
That's really neat because it does take the initiative of a single person to, like, bring this in and go, and it's nice to see that, like, that those efforts are being rewarded with promotions and, like, more impact and scale. It's goes to show that, like, this is driving change, not just from a sustainability perspective, but also for saving the company money, which is ultimately why they're gonna fund a dedicated role to this and continue to invest in it, as heavily as they are, which is great to see.
Yeah, 100%. I would just say, add to that, we're not, as the standard setting body, we provide the software and the platform, but it's the people in the lab, the lab leads or the researchers themselves that are the ones that are actually driving the movement, that are getting the results. And so, really, we're almost like just a clearinghouse for all the incredible work that we're doing. And we're providing the scaffolding for them to see success, build their career, and help make their company more sustainable, and hopefully that helps their company grow and achieve their goals and outcomes, not only their environmental goals, but by increasing their reputation, their stakeholder engagement, their positive relationship with their customers actually achieve better financial success as well.
Love it. All right, I want to talk a little bit about your own career journey because you were an architect for almost a decade, building green building standards. And now you're running the largest sustainability certification company. What's your journey and what brought you here?
Yeah, so always been interested in sustainability from a young age. In fact, really my interest in environmentalism and sustainability started with my mom. She was a single mom, a school teacher in Eastern Washington State. We spent a lot of time outside, and I distinctly remember her telling me and my sister about global climate change and the fact that it was going to impact these incredible natural environments that we love to spend time in. So I knew it was something that I wanted to do. I think paired with that, particularly where I come from, I'm from Eastern Washington State, and there's a legacy of mining that has caused a lot of environmental pollutions and toxins that have an impact on population health. And when I was in junior high, I actually did like a whole research study on the legacy of mining pollution and the history of that in our region. And one of the things that I discovered when I got to university, where I studied architecture, was that there's actually a way to have economic development create buildings that didn't make a negative impact on the environment or on society, but actually contributed positively to the environment and society. And I got involved with an organization that created a standard called the Living Building Challenge. And the concept was really powerful. It's like, how do you create a building that functions like nature, like a tree? It gives back more than it takes from the environment. We designed buildings that were powered 100% from solar energy, that operated within the water balance of their site, that were made from non toxic materials that actually helped clean up the supply chain for how building materials were made and buildings were constructed. And so that was really inspirational to me how you could actually create and use commerce and design and architecture as a way to heal the environment or at least produce a neutral effect on the environment rather than it necessarily being negative. So that was sort of the foundation of my sustainability career in architecture. And I went on to create a number of different standards along with my colleagues, including different versions of the Living Building Challenge. We created some of the first net zero energy and zero carbon standards, as well as a number of standards for building materials to eliminate toxic chemicals and to operate within a net positive life cycle, meaning the creation of the product itself actually gave back more to the environment than it took. So that was kind of the core of what I did for a decade, as you mentioned. Kind of along that journey, I had an opportunity to meet Allison Paradise, who's the founder of My Green Lab, and she sucked me into the mission, helped me understand the huge environmental impact of the scientific and research community. And there wasn't any standards or certifications to kind of get the community united and to empower individuals that were passionate about sustainability to make a difference in their own labs. I became a strategic advisor, helped set up sort of the organizational infrastructure. Eventually, they invited me to join the board. And then when Allison decided to pursue some personal passions, they asked me to take on the CEO role, which was a little bit nerve wracking, I would say. I've fortunately benefit from an incredible team of mostly former scientists. We have 7 PhD researchers on staff, and almost all the rest of our team are former scientists except myself. So I kind of bring the standard and certification angle to the business, while the
Yeah.
rest of the team really brings the science angle.
I think that's really important to touch on too, because I talk to a lot of people who know that like similar things that that your mom instilled in you, like our natural resources are getting hurt because of the changes we're making to the climate, and they want to bring things forward at work, but they're not a sustainability person, or they don't have all of the right education to to feel confident in this role. And here you are, an architect stepping into the CEO role at My Green Lab. Can you talk a little bit about that tension and like how did you overcome it and be like, no, I have skill sets that are complementary here, and it sounds like you surrounded yourself with a team that brings that more technical skill set.
I think certainly there was a lot of learning that I had to do, and science is sort of an intimidating field, and scientists are incredibly brilliant individuals, obviously. So I think obviously approaching with a lot of humility. I think one of the things you also quickly learn is that there's so many different disciplines in science, and nobody's an expert in every one of them. And so
Hmm.
what we try to provide, rather than hey, you need to do this experiment this way, is rather a framework of principles and best practices that
Okay.
each researcher can then think about and apply in their own context. So we don't pretend to have the solution for everyone. Instead, we provide the awareness of where the environmental impact is. We provide a suite of potential solutions and then the principles for how to apply them. So just to give
Hmm.
you an example, we recommend people consider green chemistry. We don't say, do this instead of this. We educate people on the 12 principles of green chemistry and how they can be applied, what the logic behind them are, and then the scientists themselves have to figure out how to implement that in their work.
Yeah.
So it's more about kind of providing that awareness and then scaffolding and framework rather than being an expert in every single discipline. And so I think, kind of approaching it with a bit of humbleness that we don't know the answer, but we do know that there's impact and we do know that there's solutions, and then guiding people to figure it out on their own is kind of the magic of the program.
Cool. And for anybody listening who wants to dive a little bit more into the practical steps that labs are taking, I had an episode with Chuck Blanchett from Boston Children's Hospital where we talked a lot about the lab efforts they were doing there, which they worked with My Green Lab. And then also Jacob Werner, who is also an architect and building Green Labs, and Pam Greenlee, who was at MIT and brought a lab program to that group of researchers. So I'll make sure to link all of those in the show notes if anybody wants to dive deeper there. Okay, so let's shift a little bit to political headwinds. And I'm curious about, there's a lot of noise around ESG pullbacks right now. From where you sit, working with thousands of labs globally, what are you seeing is actually happening on the ground? Are people stopping this work? What's happening?
I would certainly say like the work in the lab hasn't really changed, and the momentum's still there very strongly. I do think the political context in the U.S., particularly the anti-DEI executive order, basically that said if you're implementing inappropriate DEI policies, the U.S. federal government wasn't going to buy from you or wasn't going to do business with you, put a chill in a lot of boardrooms.
Yeah.
I think there was also a conflation with a lot of executive teams on issues around DEI and sustainability.
Oh,
And it all
interesting.
just kind of got lumped into like, oh, it's all ESG stuff.
Hmm.
Sustainability is actually very different than sort of the social goals, the S in ESG. And if you look at life science itself, actually, we love to share a chart where the number of net zero commitments throughout 2025 and into 2026 has continued to scale exponentially. So while there was a little bit of nervousness from boardrooms, particularly around that executive order, with the
Yeah.
US federal government being the largest purchaser of lab products, just like it's the largest purchaser of most products,
Yeah.
there was a little bit of hesitation, people maybe talking about things a little less publicly. We did see some organizations specifically backtrack on their diversity targets or how those diversity targets are tied to executive comp, but we
Mm.
haven't seen any of that happen in terms of their sustainability goals. I will also
Okay.
say all the organizations that maybe publicly backed off their diversity topics are still implementing the same programs underneath, but perhaps not as publicly. So while maybe some of the messaging has changed, the work has continued. I think the other thing, while there's a lot of political noise, there's not a lot of enforcement from the federal government on any of these policies. I mean, they're having a hard time getting
Mm.
people to follow the green purchasing policies that had passed under Biden. So the idea that all of a sudden the Trump administration was going to be able to force every company working with the federal government to completely upend and change all of its internal policies overnight is unrealistic. And I think boardrooms are starting to realize that now. So I think the work is going on, and what we're seeing continue to move forward just as quickly. And we're seeing like a reinforcement of it in Europe, almost like doubling down because of the pullback in the US. And I just got back from a conference in China, and it was pretty incredible to see like all over the airport, every single corporate having ESG messaging in China.
Wow.
The US is sort of one microcosm. Obviously, it's the largest economy in the world,
Yeah.
but I think it's a particular viewpoint of a particular group of people in the US that's actually not shared more broadly if you look across corporate boardrooms. So the work is going on just perhaps a bit more quietly under the radar.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Good to remember, and good for anybody who's listening who's thinking maybe it's not worth even trying because, my company has pulled back or anything like that. Like there's probably people still there that care. It's definitely worth going forward with.
One anecdote, there's one company we work with, I won't name names. They very specifically pulled hugely back from any of their ESG goals and targets, and then they started losing business. Because the
Mm-hmm.
largest customers in life science do care about sustainability. And all of a sudden, they've re-engaged.
Yeah.
The business logic right now in life science is the biggest purchasers really do care. If you think about the largest universities, the largest biotech and pharmaceutical companies, maybe the US federal government, you're not going to get as much traction, but other governments around the world. And so even those that are ESG skeptics, as soon as it starts being a business imperative, they're coming back around.
All right. So at the beginning, you mentioned these these two companies that are part of the group you're doing. You have a for-profit subsidiary that raised venture capital. That feels like an unusual move for a nonprofit. Can you share a little bit more about what was behind that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the certification business is actually a lot of companies are structured like this. You may not be aware because often the subsidiary sort of isn't the leading brand that you talk about. So, for example, the U.S. Green Building Council. There's the U.S. Green Building Council, which owns the standards, sets the standards and certifications, and then they partner with an organization called Green Business Certification Incorporated that actually does all the auditing, verification, and provides the technology infrastructure
Okay.
for the lead standard and the other standards that they operate. The beauty of that structure is it allows a nonprofit organization to own and control the standards to ensure a high level of integrity, and that the standards are really focused on serving the public interest. And then in our case, that nonprofit organization actually owns the for profit subsidiary. There's clear firewalls in between those two entities so that we can have a really credible and trusted auditing process. But on top of that, the for profit business allows us to raise money to capitalize and scale up our mission much faster than we would be able to do with a nonprofit structure alone. So while we still get to keep the mission focused as paramount because that's the owner of the business and controller of the standards, the for profit subsidiary allows us to bring the future quite a bit closer by raising venture capital so we can scale up our technology infrastructure, deliver high quality customer service, use the best tools, and make sure that we have a really rigorous, scalable enterprise scale certification process.
The firewalls are interesting there because I was going to ask about tensions between that and having the regulating, you know, part arm that's supposed to be true to the values, competing with something that's venture backed and needs to hit, financial goals and things like that.
Yeah, so I think For us, I think it allows us to kind of have the best of both worlds. We have a mission-based nonprofit that is always keeping the impact paramount, but then we have a for-profit business with the ability to access all the things that venture and technology can bring to being able to scale up and deliver on our mission in a way that we never could as just a nonprofit organization. So I think it gives us a really nice balance. I will say we're not for every venture investor. Some venture investors are just about, getting a return and making money. The type of venture investors that are going to fund a for-profit subsidiary of a nonprofit are the type that also have an interest in the mission. But for a certification business, it's really interesting. The quality, the integrity of our standards, the impact that we're having, that's actually our brand. And that's what's going to help us
Mm-hmm.
scale and make a big impact in the world. So there's actually a lot less tension than you would realize because our investors realize that keeping the standard paramount, ensuring that we have trust and integrity from the market is what is going to build long term brand value.
If My Green Lab succeeds beyond your wildest dreams, in 10 years, what's going on with it? What does it look like?
Yeah, well, our vision is that all science is conducted in a way that benefits the health and well being of people and the planet. Are we going to get all the way there in 10 years? I think that we're going to make incremental progress on that goal. I do think in 10 years, every leading organization in science can prioritize sustainability. I don't think we're going to hit 100% of the market, but 20, 25% would be incredibly influential and start to really move the needle.
Yeah.
We have 5,000 labs right now. I think we could scale that up by 10x at least over the next 10 years, hopefully more. And more fundamentally, we want to change the culture so that every scientist understands their environmental impact and knows how to make a difference through their work and their actions. So it's not only about scaling up the number of certifications, while that matters, we want to get the leading institutions in the world, the leading organizations. Fundamentally, we want to change the culture so that sustainability is expected in scientific research just alongside important issues like health and safety and rigor and reproducibility. So we want to elevate sustainability, and we do think that we can achieve that over the next decade. And maybe more broadly, one of the things that I'm personally very motivated about within the life science industry specifically is life science is the one industry where nobody questions the science. And we're used to making long term strategic bets for the benefit of society and human health, as well as the health of the environment. So we believe that we can be the first industry to truly disconnect economic growth from environmental impact, from carbon impact, demonstrate that net zero is truly possible, and thereby inspire the rest of the industries to follow suit. And if not science, who else? And we believe very strongly that over the next decade we can accomplish that.
Wow. I mean, that's very inspiring. I hope you do. What do you think's the biggest hurdle to that?
Yeah, I think, obviously resources is a challenge. One of the opportunities we have with this new structure is to bring a lot more resources to the table quickly. I do think there is a little bit of a challenge in sustainability right now where we're focused a bit too much on measurement and reporting. I'll give you an example. Right now, there's a huge movement around doing life cycle analysis of every single product that you buy in a lab to get a product carbon footprint. Unfortunately, life cycle analysis, while it's science based, is based on a lot of really inaccurate data. And the way that we do carbon reporting as an organization is also based on relatively inaccurate data. So I think sometimes corporate sustainability teams can get so caught up in producing carbon reports that are accurate, sort of, but the underlying data is not
Mm.
very accurate. And what we need to be focused on, instead of just reporting and trying to measure things, is taking action. and actually driving real impact. I don't want to say we don't want to take action that's not measurable. We definitely want to take action that's measurable, but we don't want to get so caught up in the regulation and reporting requirements that we forget the whole reason we're in this business is to reduce environmental impact and to transform the industry. So that's one of my concerns right now is that we kind of got to get past this spending a whole bunch of time reporting and focus more on taking action.
That's good advice. How would somebody know if they're building these reports off of inaccurate data? Like, are there places
Well,
that you know
they're
that
all
are
based on inaccurate data, I guess. You just sort of have to accept that as a fundamental nature. Like, for example, if you're going to do life cycle analysis of a pipette tip, you're going to assume it's made of, let's say it's made of polypropylene. That polypropylene you're going to get out of a database has a carbon footprint number of X. Your factory uses a certain amount of energy. And so you just have to understand when you're adding up a whole bunch of different assumptions that your ultimate result is probably going to have, some level of inaccuracy. So I think you just have to be comfortable with that
Mm-hmm.
and make directionally accurate decisions, not try to get an accurate result. So, for example, we know that recycled plastics are better than non recycled plastics. We know that most bio based plastics, and you have to do the research to make sure you're making the right decision there, have lower impact than non bio based plastics. And so you can make directional decisions on how to make or select better products without spending millions of dollars trying to get an inaccurate result from fundamentally inaccurate data or data that fundamentally is very sensitive to the final outcome. So just to sort of figuring out like what is the level of accuracy necessary to identify hotspots and make decisions and only going that deep and then focusing your time and attention on the actual actions.
Yeah, and I imagine that certification survey that you guys offer is helps you get through that thinking and identify where it is that makes sense to take action and gives you rough baselines that you can come back and measure against. Is that right?
Yeah, that exactly right. So we try to provide a level of accuracy that gives you the directional information without necessarily taking a huge amount of effort.
Yeah.
There can be like paralysis by analysis if you go too deeply. And so we try to make it simple, but also make it science based. And then also put the data in the hands of the scientists. So if they want to go deeper, they want to enter their own values, they really want to understand the environmental impact of each aspect of what they're doing, they can also do that in the tool. If they just want to take those big actions that they know are going to have an impact and get the biggest bang for their buck, they can just do that too. So it's kind of scales up based upon the amount of time and effort and their level of ambition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. How long does the survey or the certification take? Like, what's the time commitment for the teams?
Every individual has to take a short survey in the lab, and that only takes like 10 to 15 minutes each.
Okay.
The longer, more comprehensive assessment tool where you're checking off all your policies and procedures, that takes a bit more time. We estimate it's around 2 hours per month for the lab lead, and it takes 3 to 6 months. That's just to do sort of like the administration of the program. If you're
Okay.
going to implement a big program, for example, you're going to do a comprehensive waste audit where you look at every piece of waste, what it's coming from, whether it can be recycled, whether it can be changed, you weigh it. That's going to take more time.
Yeah.
We try to make like the administration as simple as possible so people can focus time on the actual actions and activities that are driving impact.
James, you're trying to change an entire industry. What does sustainability look like for you personally? How do you take care of yourself?
I will readily admit that one of the things that gives me a little bit of anxiety is like my personal carbon footprint from doing a lot of travel. I just got back from keynoting a conference on sustainability and medical devices in China. We try to do a lot of things remote. We actually have an online conference rather than an in person conference, which is a great way for us to get our community together without traveling. That helps a lot. Our whole team works remotely.
Hmm.
but there is nothing that like can replace face to face, particularly if you're trying to change people's minds.
Yeah.
And so, obviously there's an important part of our component. We hope that when we do travel and we go out and we engage with audiences or we engage with key partners, the benefit of that engagement is more than the cost that it takes to do it. I will say for me personally, figuring out sort of like a pace of travel that works well for me, where I at least get to take a day or two to like go on a run around the city. I was just in China. I had one morning at least of unstructured time where I got a morning jog in and got to have an amazing dim sum lunch and enjoy the culture a little bit is really crucial to my own mental health. So I just try to
Mhm.
sort of pace things out a little bit more than I used to, so that I'm not sort of programmed 100% of the time, and then that allows me to bring definitely a much better attitude and more positive energy to the work that we're doing. And a lot of the work that I'm doing, again, it's like trying to change somebody's mind that maybe doesn't think this is important. So having the right energy is really crucial. And so kind of taking the time and space to eat right, to sleep enough, to get exercise and to have a little time for myself is really crucial to being successful in this role.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that it's good to hear how other people take care of themselves because it can weigh on you, thinking people who care about this care a lot. And so, it's important to make sure we're nourishing ourselves so that we can continue to show up in the way the planet needs us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that. I would also say maybe something else that, it's pretty cool. And I try to think of this all the time that, I get to run an organization that's trying to transform the scientific community around sustainability. And what an amazing way to spend your working time and, to get some income from it and to be able to build a life around it. So I do think it's really important within the sustainability industry that we make it fun, we make it exciting, we empower the people that we're working with to grow their careers and be successful. I
Yeah.
think sometimes sustainability can get really like doom and gloom, like, there's nothing we can do. Corporations are so terrible, blah, 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 blah. When you put yourself in a different mindset that actually we can do things about it. I've seen it actively, and we are transforming an entire industry. That's exhilarating. Like we're doing the work. And so, anybody in science, I would encourage you to join our community and to think about the positive outcomes that they could have. And if it's not in our community, the green building community has an amazing group. And, the data center community has a great group called the Infrastructure Masons that is working on similar issues. So find your people, try to drive change, and I think we're going to be successful when we make it fun and we show that there are these positive potential outcomes that we can reach and not just sit in the doom and gloom, because I think people can get really stuck in that.
Oh, I completely agree. I was definitely in the doom and gloom cycle. And then this podcast actually has introduced me to so many amazing people who are taking great steps and are very inspiring. So, yeah, finding your people is really important and iterating on the successes of others, helping people out and learning from each other. James, how can people find your community or get in touch with you or learn more if they are interested?
Yeah, well, definitely the front door for us is mygreenlab.org. You can learn all about our programs. We have actually a free like crash course on lab sustainability called the My Green Lab Ambassador Program. It's a series of short videos, and then you get a certificate and you get invited to be part of our community. That's a great kind of like gateway drug to getting involved deeper. We have what's called an accredited professional program, which is for people that want to really become an expert on lab sustainability. It's relatively inexpensive. I think it's only $25 per course for students and something like $75 for professionals in commercial businesses. And so that's a great way to kind of like really deepen your knowledge and expertise. We have an online conference every year. It's very inexpensive. So that's a great way to get involved. And feel free to reach out to me. Like, I love supporting people that care and are passionate about sustainability. And if I can't be the right person, I can often connect them. So feel free to shoot me an email to james@mygreenlab.org, and I would love to hear from everybody. And if you're in life science or you're adjacent or you just want to learn what we're doing and how you can apply it to your work, please do reach out. We'd love to be in touch.
Love it. Thank you so much, James. Thanks for talking us through how to make more systematic impact at a larger scale through something like certifications and building this community and network. I think it's really inspiring, and I think a lot of people will learn from you. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this. I appreciate the invite.
I love stories like these. One survey becomes one champion, becomes one company policy, becomes one industry requirement. And this is what happens when you give people data and they become champions. If you work in a lab, be sure to check out mygreenlab.org and their free ambassador program. And if you don't work in a lab, my question for you for the day is, what would it look like to get the data for your company's actual impact and start from there? I'm Louisa Henry, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job.